Did you know that our legal system in the UK, namely English common law, may have quite a lot of its origins in Sharia law? Ooh. So what's this all about? Well, historians are debating the amount of influence that Sharia law had on the emerging legal systems in Europe in the early Middle Ages. The debate isn't on whether the influence was there or not, just the amount of influence, right? And English common law is a good example of an area you might want to have a look at, because English common law has striking similarities with Malakite's laws, which is a school of jurisprudence in Islam. It's one of the biggest ones, one of the big four. And that emerged in the 8th century. So that's before England was even a thing. England didn't exist, really, in its current form in the 8th century. But these laws, which have a very, very, very similar framework to English common law, did exist in the Muslim world, right? And you can kind of see how this influence would have come about. You know, in the early medieval period, Europe was in trouble. The Roman Empire had fallen and our civilization had suffered a major setback. For example, we forgot how to make concrete. The Romans were really good at it. It meant they could build things like the Colosseum, and then we forgot how to do it. And that meant for centuries we could only build things out of wood. But meanwhile, in the Muslim world, they were smashing it. They were doing algebra. They were building cities with sewage systems in. They were trading. They were becoming extremely wealthy. They were expanding their territories. And they had an established and stable legal system with Sharia law. Now, at that time, you had the Silk Road, where most of the trade passed through. And of course, the Silk Road goes through the Middle East and it comes out in Europe. And this would have meant you would have had European merchants trading with Muslim merchants. And in order to do that, you need a commercial legal framework that everybody works under. So that would cover things like debt, managing contracts, that sort of thing. All of that sort of stuff. So Europe would have had a long period of time, centuries of exposure to the Sharia legal system through trade before it had really developed its own legal systems. So if you're a European ruler and you want to create and enforce a legal system in your country, you would be looking round for inspiration. And if you've been trading with a group of people for a long time who do have an established legal system, who are also more prosperous and more advanced than you, it would be a no-brainer for a European ruler at that time to go, we'll borrow some of their stuff because they're doing better than us at the moment. And this makes sense. And also, our merchants are already pretty much working to these laws because they're trading with the same people that we're going to borrow from. So you can see the incentive for European rulers to, adopt large parts of Sharia law when they're building their legal systems. And, some of these similarities have gone over time. For example, the Catholic Church really didn't like it when people charged interest on loans, and of course charging interest on loans in Islam is forbidden. There's another similarity. Obviously we now don't think twice about charging interest, but it is still the case for Muslims that they're not allowed to do that. And so when you look at that shared history, you look at the similarities in legal structures, and of course the fact that Muslims and Christians both share the same God of Abraham. It becomes very difficult to believe people in the media and people online who make out that Western civilization and Islam is somehow diametrically opposed to each other. Because this isn't the case, really. When you look at the facts, we're more like close cousins, first cousins maybe. if France is England's brother, then the Islamic world is both France and England's cousin. That's the way I see it. And I experienced this firsthand when I was in India. When I was in the Hindu areas, I'll be honest, I really struggled to figure out what was going on because I didn't have context for things. I didn't understand the culture as well as I could have done. And to be honest, with things like Hinduism, the more I try to learn about it and the more I try to understand it, the less sense I can make of it. It's such a complicated religion that's very different to what I grew up with, which was essentially Catholicism. But here's the thing: when I went to Kashmir, which is in the Himalayas, and it's pretty much exclusively Muslim up there, I found it a lot easier because Islam and the customs around it are a lot more similar to Catholicism and European culture than Hinduism is. We've got a lot in common. We really do. And I wish more people understood that, because if they saw the Islamic world not as something that was completely different and therefore something to be wary of or scared of even, if they saw it as basically fruit from the same tree, although it might come in a different shape, different size, different colours occasionally, people might wear different hats and eat different food. The underlying structure of European societies and the type of societies that you often get in the Muslim world are very similar legal systems, patriarchy, similar sort of religious rituals as well. And when you look at religions and cultures that are not influenced by the God of Abraham in the same way, they really are quite different. That doesn't mean they're a threat in any way, shape or form. It just makes it harder for a guy like me from Britain to understand, because it's just that we're not as closely related to each other as, say, we are to Islam in Europe. We're just not. It's also worth remembering that there were, Muslim kingdoms in Europe for quite some time, particularly places like Granada in Spain or Portugal or Sicily, again where legal systems were established by the Muslim rulers at that time, which again bear a lot of similarities with things like English common law. And there's also a debate going on amongst historians as to the extent Henry II was influenced by Sharia law when he was sort of creating and enhancing the legal system we still have here. So, I think it's a bit of food for thought. I think it's important to reflect on. And I do think that people who have been convinced that Islam is a threat, or have been convinced that Muslim countries have a backward culture, I just ask them to reflect that really, in many ways, we are two sides of the same coin. Like, our interests between Europe and the Middle East have often been at odds together on the basis of power or influence or wealth. But culturally, legally, we are very similar.